In the city of Lagos, running is a language everyone speaks. You don't wait to understand it. You don't ask questions. The moment you see bodies moving fast, feet slapping concrete, bags swinging, voices screaming words you can't even make out, your legs decide before your brain does. That is survival. That is Lagos. I had lived in this city for 26 years. I knew her sounds, her smells, her moods. I knew how the air felt different at Agege at noon compared to Yaba at midnight. I knew which bus conductors cheated and which pepper soup joints stayed open past curfew. Lagos and I understood each other. So that Tuesday afternoon in March, when the crowd on Agege Motor Road suddenly exploded into panic, I did what any Lagos person would do. I ran. My name is Son. I am a freelance photographer. I had just finished a shoot near the Agege overhead bridge, a family portrait for a client who paid late, as clients often do, and I was walking toward the Danfo stop when the screaming started. Not one scream, not two, hundreds of voices, all at once, all saying the same thing without words: run. And I ran, until something made me stop, until something made me turn around. That was the last normal moment of my life. I don't know why I stopped. To this day, I cannot explain it clearly. One moment I was running with the crowd, feet pounding the road, shoulders knocking against strangers. The next moment, something inside me went completely still, like a switch turned off. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a voice. It was more like a feeling, the kind you get when you are about to step into a gutter in the dark, and your body knows before your eyes do. I slowed down. Then I stopped completely. The crowd pushed past me. Men, women, a woman carrying a baby on her back and a market bag in each hand, a young boy still holding his school bag. They all streamed past me like water around a rock. Nobody looked at me. Everyone was looking forward to it. I turned around. The road behind me was empty. Not quiet empty. Completely, absolutely empty. No cars. No hawkers. No sound of generators from the shops lining the road. Even the yellow Danfos that normally jammed that road nose to nose were gone. Just silence and dust. And then the voice came. Low. Calm. Not rushing. Not shouting. As if whoever said it knew, without any doubt, that I would obey. Hey, stop right there. I froze. My heart didn't race. It stopped. I turned slowly. There were 5 of them. They stood spread across the road about 30 meters behind me. Still. Perfectly still, the way mannequins stand in shop windows. They wore plain clothes, dark trousers, no uniforms, and they were looking directly at me. Not scanning the road, not looking at each other, looking at me. What made the cold come up my spine was not how many they were, or how still they stood. It was their eyes, open, unblinking, fixed on me like they had been watching me for a long time and had finally decided to let me know. I had been a photographer for 8 years. I had watched people through lenses in crowded markets, on expressways, at funerals. I knew how people looked when they were afraid, when they were angry, when they were pretending. I knew human faces. These faces were doing something that human faces don't do. They were not reacting to anything. No wind made them blink. No noise made them flinch. They just stood and stared, and slowly, so slowly I almost told myself I was imagining it, they began to move toward me. One step, together, then another. I ran. Not because someone told me to, because every part of my body agreed. In that single moment, that standing still was no longer an option. I ran until I reached a compound off a side street near Dopemu. An old man was sitting outside fixing a radio. I nearly knocked him over. He looked at me the way Lagos people look at someone who is clearly not okay. Patient, unsurprised, waiting. I stood there catching my breath, looking back at the road. Nothing followed me. I told myself it was stressful. I told myself I had not eaten since morning. I told myself Lagos was full of strange people and strange moments, and not all of them meant something. But I knew those eyes were real. That was Tuesday. Go back to the Friday before that, and things were already strange. I just didn't know how to name it yet. A group had appeared in the Agege and Dopemu area about 10 days earlier. They called themselves the Community Safety Task Force. About 12 men in total, always moving in groups of 3 or 4. They wore matching gray caps and carried walkie-talkies. They set up small tables at major junctions and handed out leaflets warning residents about rising street crime. At first, nobody questioned them. In a neighborhood where police were rare and genuine help was rarer, these men felt like a gift. Market women thanked them. Landlords let them use compound walls to post notices. A local church even announced their presence on Sunday. I took their photo for my own archive. Just a habit. I did not know, that Friday, that those photos would later save my life. The first time I noticed something was wrong with the task force. It was a Saturday morning. I was buying bread near Agege when one of the gray-capped men walked up to a group of market women and said, quietly but clearly, "Move away from this junction. Something will happen here in the next 10 minutes." The women gathered their things and moved, some complaining, some curious. I stayed. I had my camera. 11 minutes later, a fight broke out between two bus conductors at that exact junction. Bottles broke. People scattered. 3 stalls were knocked over. Chaos, yes, but the kind Lagos sees every week. Nothing unusual. Except for this. When the panic started and people ran, the task force men did not move toward the trouble. They didn't separate the fighters or help the women who fell. They stood at the edges of the scattering crowd and watched, moving their eyes slowly from person to person, almost like they were taking mental notes. I raised my camera. One of them turned and looked directly at my lens. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just looked, long and steady. The way you look at something you are filing away in your memory. I lowered the camera. I told myself I was reading too much into things. But I kept the photo. The first disappearance happened the following Monday. His name was Baba Toby. Everybody in the Dopema market knew him. A middle-aged man who sold electrical cables from a small table near the bus stop. Cheerful man. Always had a radio playing. Always waved. That Monday afternoon, there was another sudden crowd panic on the main road. Loud bang. Probably a tire bursting. Or a vehicle backfiring. Lagos never gave you time to confirm. And hundreds of people ran. I was not there. My neighbor, Isioma, told me about it later while we shared a meal. Baba Toby just vanished, she said. Not with alarm, but with the mild confusion people use in Lagos when something doesn't make complete sense, but also isn't worth fighting over. Nobody saw him run. Nobody saw him fall. He was there before the panic. And after the panic, his table was still there, his radio still playing. But he was gone. His wife reported it to the police station. The officer wrote something in a book and told her to come back in a week. She came back 3 times. Each time, a different officer. Same blank face. No investigation. No noise. No search. Baba Toby just disappeared from a crowd. And the city moved on. That was when the unease started living inside my chest. After Baba Toby, I started keeping a notebook. Not because I knew what I was looking for. Because something in me needed to record things. To line them up and stare at them. I was a photographer. I believed in evidence. I believed in things you could hold and point to. The second disappearance happened 9 days later. A teenage girl named Comfort, who sold cold water sachets near the Agege Stadium Junction. Same pattern. Sudden crowd panic. People scattering. And when everything settled, Comfort was gone. Her styrofoam cooler was still on the ground. Her purse was still beside it. The third was a retired teacher called Mr. Emmanuel. Gone after a panic near the Penn Cinema area. His church put up a handwritten notice. 3 people attended the small prayer meeting held for him. 3 people are gone. 3 panics. Each time, the task force men were present. Each time, they stood at the edges and watched. I wrote it all in the notebook. Dates, times, locations, names. I drew a rough map of the area and marked each disappearance with an X. The marks formed a pattern. Not random. They followed main roads, junction by junction, spreading outward from the Agege Bridge area like something was drawing a slow circle. I stared at that map for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and started telling people. Telling people was a mistake. Not because the information was wrong. Every fact I shared was real, documented, dated. But Lagos has a particular way of protecting itself from fear. It laughs at the things it cannot afford to believe. I told my neighbor Emeka first. He listened with his arms crossed, then said, "Son, people disappear in Lagos every day. Where have you been?" He went back to his phone. I told Isioma. She looked at my notebook, looked at my map, and said, "Maybe those people just traveled. Not everyone tells their neighbors goodbye." She said it gently, like she was worried about me. I went to the community WhatsApp group and typed a careful, detailed message. Within minutes, 3 people sent laughing emojis. Someone replied, "Now Lagos. Face your life." The message was buried under pepper soup recommendations before nightfall. That evening, I sat on my balcony and watched the street below. 2 of the task force men were standing at the junction at the bottom of my road. They were talking quietly to each other, or they appeared to be talking. Then one of them looked up, straight at my window. I stepped back from the railing quickly, heart knocking against my ribs. I waited 2 minutes, then looked again carefully from the side of the wall. They were gone, but I had the feeling, solid as concrete, that my warning had somehow reached them. The following morning, I went back to every location where someone had disappeared. Not to ask questions. I had already learned that asking questions in this neighborhood made you the strange one. I went with my camera and my notebook, walking slowly, looking at the ground. I found the first mark near the Agege junction. It was on the concrete pavement, close to the gutter line, where a wall met the road. Small, roughly the size of a man's palm. It looked like it had been painted with something dark. Not spray paint, not chalk. It was inside the texture of the concrete itself, like it had been pressed in when the surface was still wet. 3 lines curved, meeting at a single point, like 3 rivers flowing into one mouth. I photographed it. I found the second mark at the Penn Cinema bus stop. Same symbol, same size, also placed low, near the ground, in a corner where people would never think to look. The third was near the stadium junction. Same mark. At every single disappearance site, the same symbol. I had walked past these locations dozens of times before. I had never noticed them. I stood over the third mark for a long time, crouching down, staring at it. Behind me, I heard footsteps. I stood up fast and turned. Nobody there. Just a goat eating paper near an electricity pole. But when I checked my camera as I walked home, the last photo I had taken, the one of the third symbol, had a blur in the corner that was not the goat. It was the shape of a man, standing just behind my shoulder. I had not seen anyone when I turned around. I started watching the task force differently now. Before, I had looked at them the way you look at strangers. Broad attention, no focus. Now I watched specific things. Hands, eyes, patterns of movement. What I noticed over 3 careful days confirmed what I had begun to suspect. During crowd panics, the task force split into pairs. One pair always moved to the left edge of the scattering crowd. Another pair moved to the right. The remaining men held the back, where the slower people were, the elderly, the loaded traders, the confused ones. They were not chasing danger. They were not assisting anyone on the ground. They were working the crowd the way a net works water, spreading at the edges, staying behind. And they counted. I know because I watched carefully enough. Their lips moved during the panic, not speaking to each other, not calling out warnings. Small, quiet movements of the mouth, like a silent count. On the third day, I had positioned myself on an elevated spot near a bridge support, camera ready. During a small panic triggered by a motorcyclist crashing, I captured 6 clear images of the task force members working the crowd. Then one of them stopped, turned his head, looked upward at precisely the angle where I was crouched. He did not shout or point. He just looked. And then, slowly, he smiled. Not a friendly smile. A smile that said, "We know you're watching. We have always known." The nightmare started that same night. I don't normally remember dreams. Son the photographer sleeps like a stone and wakes up clean. But this night was different. In the dream, I was standing on a Agege motor road, and it went on forever in both directions. No end, no junction, just road. The road was packed with people, all running in the same direction. Thousands of them. Faces I knew and faces I didn't. All running in total silence. No footsteps. No breathing. Just movement. I stood still in the middle of them. As they ran past, some of them disappeared. Not falling, not being pulled. Just there one moment, gone the next, like a candle flame meeting wind. And nobody around them noticed. The crowd just closed up the space where the person had been and kept running. I looked down at my feet. The symbol was drawn in a circle around me. 3 curved lines meeting at a center point, glowing faintly, like embers under ash. I tried to step over the circle. I couldn't. I looked up, and the 5 figures from the road were there, standing outside the running crowd, watching me. Still, unblinking. The crowd flowed around them like they were pillars. One of them raised his hand and pointed at me. Then I woke up. It was 3:17 in the morning. My room was dark. From outside my window, far away, I could hear the sound of many feet on the pavement. Running. I found the street priest 2 days after the nightmare. He was not hard to find. I had seen him before. A thin man who sat near the overhead bridge at Agege with a small wooden table, a white cloth, and a collection of cola nuts and small bottles. People went to him for different things. I had always walked past without stopping. His name, people said, was Baba Wole. I sat across from him and placed my notebook on his table without saying anything. I watched his face. He looked at the notebook. His hands, which had been steady, became completely still, the way hands go still when the body is deciding whether to move forward or back. Then he looked up at me. "How long?" he asked. I told him. All of it. From the Tuesday panic to the symbols, to the counting lips, to the smile on the bridge. I spoke quietly, and he listened without interrupting, his eyes on my face the entire time. When I finished, silence sat between us for a long moment. Then he looked past me, over my shoulder, at the road behind me. He leaned forward. "They have seen you," he said. His voice was barely above a breath. I felt the skin on my arms pull tight. "Who are they?" I asked. He looked at me the way a man looks at someone who has just asked a question they are not yet ready for the answer to. "Close your notebook," he said, "and don't look behind you when you leave." I went back to Baba Wole the next morning before sunrise. I brought him food, EBA, and Agege soup from a woman who cooked near my compound, because I had heard that some things must be offered before they can be received. He accepted it without ceremony and gestured for me to sit. What he told me came slowly, in the way that true things are sometimes said, piece by piece, like someone laying down stones across water. He said that certain forces are ancient. They existed before Lagos was Lagos, before the roads were built on top of the old forest paths. They do not have physical bodies of their own. What they have is hunger, a deep, specific hunger, not for flesh, not for money, not for the things that human greed is made of. They feed on fear, pure fear, the kind that moves through a crowd like fire through dry grass. These forces, he said, cannot take from a crowd. A crowd is too connected, too loud, too full of competing energies. What they need is an isolated person, someone separated from the group. So they create panic, and they watch the crowd for the ones who move differently, the ones who hesitate, who turn the wrong way, who stand still when everyone else runs. Those are the ones they take. "You ran the opposite direction," Baba Wole said. He looked at me with something between pity and respect. "You are now marked." I sat with that for a long moment. "Marked how?" I asked. Baba Wole reached into the small cloth bag on his table and brought out a piece of smooth dark wood about the length of a finger. He placed it flat on the table between us. "They cannot take you in a crowd," he said. "That is the only thing protecting you now. As long as you stay inside the crowd when panic begins, move with everyone, same direction, same speed, you are invisible to them. A crowd is noise they cannot sort through." He paused. "But if you separate again, if you stop, if you turn, if you run the wrong way, you become visible again. And this time, they will not just mark you, they will take you." I thought about Baba Toby. His table is still there, his radio still playing. There one moment, gone the next. I thought about Comfort's styrofoam cooler on the ground, Mr. Emmanuel's prayer notice, with only 3 attendees. They had all, in some way, moved differently. Baba Toby was known for stopping to help when others ran. His wife had told the police that. I remembered now. Comfort was partially deaf in one ear. She often couldn't tell which direction the sound came from. Mr. Emmanuel had arthritis in both knees. They had all been slowed, all been separated. I understand now, and understanding it made everything worse. 3 days after my second meeting with Baba Wole, the panic came again. I was buying phone credit, near the Penn Cinema Junction when it started. No warning, no build-up, just a sudden explosive sound from somewhere down the road, and then that familiar wave of human movement. Everyone turning and pushing and running, voices high and wordless. Every part of me wanted to stop, to look, to understand what was happening. I made myself run. I locked my eyes on the back of the man in front of me. Tall man, blue Ankara shirt, and I matched his pace exactly. Same stride, same direction. I did not look left. I did not look right. I pushed fear down into my stomach and kept it there. The crowd carried me 4 blocks before it thinned and slowed. I stopped when others stopped. I looked confused when others looked confused. I asked someone beside me what happened, and he shrugged. Probably nothing. Lagos. We both shook our heads and went our separate ways. I walked home calmly. I thought I had done it. I thought I had followed the rule and survived. Then that evening, while washing my hands before dinner, I looked down at my left forearm. On the inside of my wrist, where the skin is thin, there was a mark. Small, dark, 3 curved lines meeting at a single center point. The same symbol from the pavement, now on my skin. I had not felt it appear. I did not know when it had been placed there. I just knew it was permanent. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my room with the light on and stared at the mark on my wrist. I pressed it, rubbed it, tried soap and a rough cloth. It did not fade. It did not smudge. It sat on my skin like it had been there since birth, clean, dark, and perfectly drawn. I told myself to be calm. I had followed the crowd. I had not separated. By Baba Wole's own words, I should have been invisible to them. And yet the mark was here, which meant one of 2 things. Either following the crowd was no longer enough, the marking had progressed past that stage, or I had not been as invisible as I thought. By morning, I had decided on what I needed to do. Hiding was no longer a strategy. Baba Wole had told me how they selected their victims. He had told me the survival rule, but he had not told me how to stop them. I went back to the bridge. This time I arrived before sunrise and waited behind a kiosk across the road until I saw the task force men begin their morning movement. 4 of them, walking in pairs toward the main junction. I followed them. Not close, not careless. I had spent 8 years learning how to follow people without being seen, a skill every street photographer needs. I kept half a block between us, always with something between me and them. I needed to know where they went when the crowd was not running. They noticed me before I expected. Not all 4 of them, just one. I was following them down a side road behind the stadium when the last man in the group slowed his pace slightly. Just slightly. The kind of adjustment you make when you want someone behind you to catch up. He did not turn. He did not stop. He simply slowed and waited until I was a few meters closer, then spoke, without looking back. "You are the photographer," he said. His voice was flat, not threatening, just accurate. I kept walking and said nothing. "You have been watching us," he continued, still not turning. "We have been watching you longer." I kept my pace steady. My camera was in my bag. My notebook was in my pocket. "There was another panic yesterday," he said, "near Yana Apaja. 3 people were separated." A pause. "You were not one of them." He said it like a compliment, like I had done something impressive. Then he stopped walking. The other 3 had turned a corner and were gone. He turned to face me for the first time. His eyes were the same as the ones on the road that first day. Open. Still. Something moving behind them that I could not name. "The next time," he said softly, "don't run." Then he turned and walked away. I stood there for a full minute before my legs remembered how to move. After that encounter, I changed my approach completely. The confrontation was not going to work. Neither was avoidance. These men, or whatever they were, already knew who I was. They had known for some time. The conversation at the stadium road had not been a warning. It was a demonstration. They wanted me to know that I was being managed, that every move I made was visible to them. So I stopped reacting. I started studying. I went through all the panic events I had documented, 8 in total, over a period of 3 weeks, and I mapped them against a timeline. Not just locations, but times of day, days of the week, weather conditions, and one other variable I had started tracking: the activity of the task force in the 48 hours before each panic. The pattern was clear. Every panic was preceded by the task force visiting the location twice in the 2 days before. One daytime visit and one visit just after dark. Panic did not happen randomly. Panic was being prepared. I also checked the symbols. Using my photographs, I confirmed that new marks had appeared at each location before the panic, not after. The marks were placed during those pre-panic visits. Someone or something was setting conditions, creating the right environment for fear to flow in a specific direction. And the task force men were not the source. They were instruments, tools being used by something that did not need to show itself, something that stayed hidden until the fear was already running. I followed them at night. It took me 3 attempts over 5 nights to do it successfully. The first 2 times, they vanished around the stadium area in a way I couldn't track, disappearing into a cluster of buildings that had no lights on any floor and no sound coming from inside. On the 3rd night, I came prepared. I had borrowed Emeka's motorcycle. I told him I had a late shoot, which he believed without question. I wore dark clothes and kept the engine off whenever I was within earshot. I watched them enter a compound behind an abandoned warehouse near the Agege railway line, the kind of place that Lagos forgets. Corrugated fencing on all sides. A single heavy door. I waited 20 minutes. Then I walked to the fence and found a gap where 2 panels had come loose at the base. I pressed through carefully, camera in hand. Inside, past the warehouse wall, there was an open area. No roof above it, just sky. In the center of the open area, the ground had been cleared and swept clean. And on the cleared ground, drawn large enough to fill a small room, was the symbol. Not 3 lines now. The full version, dozens of curved paths, all flowing inward to a single center point, like a map of every road in the city, all leading to one place. Around it, the task force men stood in a circle, facing inward, and from the center of the symbol, something rose. Not visible exactly, but present. A heaviness in the air, a pressure, like the moment before very close lightning. I raised my camera. I took the first photo. The shutter click was quiet. I had the sound switched off. But in that silence, it seemed to land like a stone in still water. One of the men turned. Not the slow turn of someone who heard a sound. The immediate, absolute turn of someone who knew. He looked directly at me. And then he said something I couldn't hear. But the others turned as well. All of them. All at once. Those open, unblinking eyes found me in the dark behind the fence gap. I ran. Not toward the fence. They were between me and it. I ran along the inner wall of the compound toward the back, praying for another gap. My feet hit debris, loose concrete, old wire. I kept running. Behind me I heard no shouts, no running feet, only silence, which was somehow worse. I found a gap in the back fence and pushed through it hard, scraping my arm against the edge, and came out onto a dark side road. I ran for 2 blocks before I allowed myself to look back. The road was empty. I kept moving, got to the motorcycle, and rode without stopping until I reached my street. I sat in my room with the door locked, shaking, not from fear alone, but from what I had seen on the camera screen. In the photo I had taken inside the compound, the symbol on the ground was clearly visible. The men in the circle were clearly visible. And in the center of the symbol, where the pressure had been, there was a shape, dark, dense, pulling light inward the way a drain pulls water. It had no clear edges. It was not exactly standing. It was occupying space the way smoke occupies a room. And it was facing my camera. They came for me the next morning, not as a crowd, not with the task force standing in a line, just 2 of them, walking toward my compound gate as I stepped outside. They did not run at me. They walked, but the walk had purpose in it, the kind of walk that has already decided how things will end. I turned and went back inside immediately, took the back exit through my landlord's kitchen. He was not home, and came out on the parallel street. I was moving fast, not running, because running draws attention and attention draws chaos, and I had learned by now that chaos in this area was no longer safe for me. I kept to crowded streets, market areas, wherever bodies were thick and voices were loud. For 3 hours I moved through the neighborhood that way, never stopping long, always keeping moving, always inside noise and numbers. By afternoon I reached Baba Wole. He looked at me and said nothing. He could see it in my face. I told him everything. The compound, the symbol on the ground, the shape in the center, the photo, the two men at my gate this morning. I showed him the photo on my camera screen. He looked at it for a long time. It has noticed you completely now, he said. Not the men. The thing behind the men. He set the camera down gently. It cannot take you in daylight on a crowded street, but it is no longer waiting. It is hunting. Then tell me how to stop it, I said. Baba Wole looked at me steadily. You already know, he said. You found the source. You have the photographs. The question is whether you are willing to go back. Baba Wole spoke for almost an hour. He told me that the symbol on the ground was not a decoration. It was a mechanism, like a machine. It had moving parts. The marks placed at panic locations were smaller versions of the same symbol, connected to the central one, like smaller pipes feeding a main channel. When fear was generated at those locations, when crowds scattered and people were taken, the energy flowed back through those marks to the center. The central symbol was the feeding point, the place where it all gathered. If you break the central symbol during an active panic, he said, the connection collapses. The energy has nowhere to go. The thing feeding on it loses its anchor in this world. I asked how to break it. He reached into his bag and brought out a bottle, small, dark glass, sealed with wax. He placed in my palm. Pour this across the center point of the symbol, he said. The entire center must be covered. Don't stop partway. Don't look up until it is done. I looked at the bottle. It was lighter than I expected for something that carried that kind of instruction. And the panic. I asked. It is already coming, Baba Wole said. I can feel it building. 2 days. Maybe less. He looked at me carefully. They will try to separate you from the crowd before you reach the compound. You cannot let that happen. I put the bottle in my inside pocket, close to my chest. I went home and I waited. It happened the next afternoon. The panic began near the Agege bridge, the same place everything had started for me. I heard it from 4 streets away. That sound of collective human fear, hundreds of feet moving all at once, voices carrying words that meant nothing individually, but together meant everything. I left my compound immediately and walked fast toward it. I needed to reach the warehouse compound. To do that, I had to move against the flow of the panicking crowd, not opposite to everyone, but diagonal, cutting through side streets while the main road cleared. The task force men were already working. I could see 2 of them at the edge of the running crowd, doing what I now understood, watching the edges, counting the isolated ones. A 3rd one saw me. He moved toward me directly, cutting through the crowd with unnatural smoothness, like the running bodies were parting for him without noticing. I pulled myself into the crowd, deep into it, into the loudest, most packed section near a cluster of market women, and let the current carry me for half a block before I peeled off into a side street on the left. The task force man was still following. I ran. Full speed now, not careful, just fast, through the narrow back roads where the ground was uneven and the buildings crowded close. He was fast too, faster than a man of his build should have been, but I knew these streets. He did not. I cut through a mechanic yard, over a small fence, through a gap between 2 buildings, and came out on the road directly behind the warehouse compound. He had lost me. I stood at the fence gap, breathing hard, hand on the bottle in my pocket. I went in. The compound was empty when I entered. No task force men, no circle, just the open space and the symbol on the ground, massive and dark, exactly as it had been in the photograph. And then the pressure came. Not wind, not sound, pressure. From the center of the symbol outward, like something breathing. The air above the center point darkened. Not the way shadows darken, but the way deep water is dark. Dense. Absolute. The shape was there. It was larger than it had looked in the photograph. It occupied the air from ground level upward, pulling the edges of visibility toward itself. I could not see a face or a form, only presence. Wait, it spoke. Not in my ears. Inside my skull directly. As if language was simply placed there. You have been coming toward me since the first day. This is where you were always going. I took the bottle from my pocket. You cannot end what you do not understand. I understand enough, I said aloud. My voice came out steady. I was surprised by that. I moved toward the center of the symbol. The pressure pushes back, not violently, but constantly, the way water pushes back when you walk against it. My legs felt heavy. My eyes wanted to look up. I kept them down, on the center point, on my feet. One step, then another. I reached the center. I broke the wax seal. I poured. The liquid spread across the symbol, and where it touched, the dark lines began to dissolve, not fade, dissolve, like salt in hot water. The pressure spiked, sudden and enormous, a force that hit my chest and made me stagger. I did not stop pouring. When the bottle was empty, the center point was covered. The shape screamed, not in sound, in absence, a silence so total it rang. And then it was gone. The compound was just a compound. Old concrete, rusting iron fence, Lego sky above, pale and ordinary. The symbol on the ground was a smear of dark residue, no longer connected, no longer whole. I stood there for a moment, breathing. Outside the fence, the city was still moving. I could hear it, generators, voices, a conductor shouting destination names down the road. Lagos does not pause for anything. Not for panic, not for mystery, not for the moments when ordinary people stumble into extraordinary darkness and come out the other side. I found the task force men the next morning. They were still there, still at the junction in gray caps. But something had left them. They looked like ordinary men now, uncertain, slightly confused, like people waking up in an unfamiliar place. Two of them had abandoned their posts entirely. The walkie-talkies were gone. The tables were folded away. Within 3 days, they had all disappeared from the neighborhood. Not the vanishing of their victims, just ordinary departure, the way anyone packs up and leaves when their reason for being somewhere is gone. Baba Toby never came back. Neither did Comfort or Mystery Manual. That way has not left me. I kept the photographs. I kept a notebook. I never published them. Not because I was afraid, but because I am still not sure what proof of something like this does to ordinary people who have enough to survive already. There are no neat endings in Lagos. There is only what happened, what you learned, and how you carry it. If only I had kept running like everyone else, I would never have known that sometimes, in Lagos, the real danger isn't what you're running from. It is what is guiding your fear.